All right, so Chrystia Freeland is in as the new finance minister, and it's bad news for Canada, especially for Alberta. I mean, for many reasons, but in a press conference yesterday, she was quoted saying, "The restart of our economy needs to be green." Freeland on decarbonization of the Canadian economy. Now, again, I've talked about this ad nauseum, but to bring it up again, the future is not green. Again, all these leftists and environmentalists always bring that up, and you can tell that they're just in a massive echo chamber. Like, I mean, as usual. Um, and again, they'll always throw out the opposite argument, but the reality is that someone like me and pretty much everyone I know who's on the right actively seeks out their opinion. But again, and again, the way you can tell if someone's in an echo chamber is if they're completely unaware of the arguments that the other side is making. And whenever I talk to environmentalists, and leftists in general, they're always like this. And how do I know? Because we'll be debating something, and I'll bring something up, and they'll be like, "Oh, well, where's your source on that?" And even if I bring up a source, which again, that's why I usually ignore bringing up sources, because whenever you do that, people, number one, they'll either say, "Oh, that's been debunked," or "they're not credible," or this, that, or the other. So that's why I kind of don't even worry about that kind of stuff. And again, the other reason being too is that you can bring up a source to pretty much prove pretty much whatever you want these days, because there's always someone who's quote unquote credible who can argue from pretty much any position. I mean, look at the whole virus thing. That's Exhibit A. But getting back to the main point here, um, it's not green. Now, why is it green? Because all of the developing countries of the world are not doubling down on green energy. That's just not happening. Look at China, look at India, look at these kind of countries. They're not. Where's the massive amount of investment in green energy? Now, what are these countries doing? They're doubling down on coal. They're doubling down on stuff like that. Why? Because it's the cheapest and it's the most efficient. Again, like it or not, it is the best form of energy, and it's not even close. So the only countries that are doubling down on renewables are the virtue signaling run by a bunch of crazy leftist countries like Canada, Germany, these kind of places. And when it comes to green energy, like I've said all along, is that the day that it can outcompete uh, the non-renewable stuff, absolutely. But the problem is that we're nowhere even close to being there. Like not even close. Like Germany has, I believe, the most green energy renewable stuff, and it funds like 20% of their energy, and not to mention too, that number is going up year over year at an increasing rate, right? So that is one of the many problems. And again, the whole, oh, we need to diversify. It's just not realistic, especially in a lot of Canada. Like it or not, there is no way somewhere like Edmonton is going to be able to go fully wind and solar. Number one, because it's not that windy of a place, and number two, because it's not very sunny. And again, the problem, like I say, and like I mentioned before too, is the whole battery technology is terrible. Again, people have this idea that if you have wind and solar, you can just store unlimited amounts of energy, but that's not true. And not only can you not store unlimited amounts, you can barely store any, right? Like you can barely store any. It's not like, yeah, you could store a week or so. No, like you can literally hardly store anything. And the other problem with wind and solar when it comes to personal, um, there's no, you're losing money putting in wind and solar. You're losing money putting in wind and solar. I've seen people that have done this that are literally in the industry, and for them, like they can literally get materials at cost, get labor at cost. It's still not something that they're going to make money off of in the long run. So again, this is the problem with wind and solar, is that it is a losing endeavor, and it's the same thing for the country. Why is it the same thing? Because energy costs have to go way up. I mean, you look at Ontario, look at what they did. That energy costs went way up. So the solution to this kind of stuff is to stop pretending like the future is green. And not to mention, I'm not saying you don't spend any time trying to improve that technology, but the idea that that's the future and we should spend any more than a tiny little bit of time on that is absolutely insane. The best thing to do is to stop. And the other thing too is that it's all based off the fundamental fraud of climate science. there is no evidence that humans are having, I would argue, any impact, and I think at the very least any significant impact on the climate. There is no evidence of it in the way we, I mean, I'm not. There's no time to get into the nitty gritty of it, but in a nutshell, um, these climate scientists have been making failed predictions going back to what, the 80s. It was the ozone, and it was peak oil, and we've had the melting glaciers and all this kind of stuff. But the reality is that um, Earth has made it thus far with far more amounts of CO2 and far more amounts of higher temperatures. I mean, there's tree lines that once existed, like literally hundreds of miles further north than tree lines currently exist. So the idea that we have to be worried about this kind of stuff is insane. Like, it's absolutely insane. And this is the last thing I'll bring up. The fundamental problem that the climate change alarmists get wrong is that when you get in a debate with these people, um, you'll make your argument, and they'll come back with, oh, here's an example of the Earth warming or the CO2 going up, and thus, no, but that's not what anybody's arguing. And this is another reason why these people are in echo chambers. What people are arguing is that humans don't have a significant impact, and this is the other way that you can tell these people have no idea what they're talking about, because if they did, they would need to come up with a good argument for, okay, why has the amount of CO2 been much higher multiple times throughout history than it is today? And not only that, we're perfectly fine. Like, why has that happened? Well, why it's happened is that natural factors have far, far greater of an effect than the human factors. Again, so that's the thing. And the other thing too to bring up is that, I guess the last thing, I mean, I could talk about this for an hour, but Canada literally contributes, I think it's around 1% of the Earth's CO2. And when you account for the amount of trees that Canada has, I literally think it's less than 0.1. Like, Canada almost already is carbon neutral, I believe. I mean, I've seen some people say that we're beyond carbon neutral. I've seen some people say we're not there. But I mean, if I mean, at the very least, we are close to being carbon neutral because trees absorb this kind of stuff. And people say, oh, when they die, they release it, but when they die, new ones grow in their place, so that offsets as well. So um, even if let's just pretend like all the climate change is this massive issue. Um, Anything that Canada does is completely meaningless. It is literally the equivalent to, peeing in the ocean and thinking that, you shouldn't, ocean water is contaminated with urine. Like, that is the equivalent. Like, um, the only way that we're going to, again, this is the other reason why, it has nothing to do with climate change. It has nothing to do with any of that. It is everything to do with the leftist ideology. They want to push socialism, and the way they're going to do it is through this climate change garbage. Because if they actually cared about climate change, they would look at the fact that China and India, those two countries alone, contribute, I believe it's like 65% of, again, just off the top of my head, I don't know what the exact number is. I'm rather sure it's the majority of CO2 throughout the world. Like, if they actually cared, they would spend like 95% of their time trying to convince China and India to do this kind of stuff if they actually cared, but they don't. Why? And the other thing too is that China and India they would laugh at you because, I mean, they'd probably point out that climate change is BS, and not to mention too, they'd point out that, again, like I say, you guys are crazy. So anyway, like I say, I could talk about that forever. But again, the big news, Freeland's in, and it's bad news for Canada. Like, they're gonna continue to push these socialist policies that's just gonna continue to continue to destroy Canada pretty much. So this is something that came out about a week ago. I wanted to talk about it earlier. I've just been, I was busy there for a while. I was away, so I was a little backlogged. But um, this 5-year old kid was killed by a 5-year old white kid was killed by a black guy, and the media almost didn't even talk about it. I mean, it trended on Twitter for quite a while, so I think that kind of forced them to bring it up. But again, the point of this being is that imagine if it was in the reverse. You know, a crazy white guy kills a random 5-year-old black kid for no reason, right? And people saying, "Oh, he did this." No, the kid's 5 years old. I can't imagine there's anything that a 5-year-old can do to deserve to be murdered. Like this isn't a Mike Brown scenario. Like that, yeah, that guy. I'm not saying he deserved to be killed, but he had no right to live at the point of what he was doing. So that is a completely different situation. But the point being, is it's a 5-year-old kid. This was clearly a crazed, insane, delusional, paranoid, God only knows what issues this guy had that did this. I think they said he was like on his lawn or something. But again, he's 5 years old, right? Like we, there's a reason why um, kids are charged separately when they commit crimes. And not only that, a 5-year-old, a 5-year-old's mental capacity is a lot different than like a 15, 16, 17-year-old, even a 14-year-old for that example. Like the it's completely different. Like you don't know hardly anything. So um this should have been a big story. I mean, if this was in the reverse, it would have been breaking news, talked about around the world. But because, and again, this is all the more evidence you need that um, the race that's discriminated against the most these days is whites, and it's not even. I mean, I do think it's close. Maybe Asians, maybe Jews, but whites is clearly the most. This idea that the majority of racism it faces it is targeting blacks is absolutely insane. And how do we know that? But because if blacks face the most racism, they would be the group that when a racist attack. Now again, we don't know that this is a racist for sure, and that's the other thing I wanted to point out too is that we don't know that it's racist. And again, that's the other problem when it comes to this whole racism stuff these days is we have to stop assuming that um, white guy attacks black guy, therefore racism, or even in the reverse. But the main point being, like I was saying, is that if this was in the reverse, if this was a crazy white guy who killed a little black kid, it would be all over the news, and rightfully so to an extent. But why is it not in the reverse? Now, why is it not in the reverse? Because the mainstream media has an agenda to push. That's why they have an agenda to push. So, anyway, the next thing I wanted to bring up here is the Bloc. The Bloc have done a good job calling out Justin Trudeau, and I guess the first thing I wanted to point out here is props to the Bloc for calling out Justin Trudeau. Again, this is people always call me biased, but the main um, and if I was so biased, I wouldn't be bringing up this story, right? Like I wouldn't be bringing up this story, but um, the Bloc are doing a good thing. They're calling out Justin Trudeau. And again, people probably still argue that I'm biased because it's against Justin Trudeau, but that's just the mental gymnastics they play. But no, Justin Trudeau objectively did something that was wrong. Nobody's denying that. What again the argument that even Justin Trudeau himself is trying to use is he had good intention. But again, it doesn't matter if you have good intentions if you break the law or you break ethics rules, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't matter what your intentions were. You're either right or you're wrong. There's no in between. We don't have exemptions in laws for it's illegal unless they had good intentions, right? So no, that's not the thing. And like I say, props to the Bloc for calling out Justin Trudeau, Bill Morneau, and all the Liberals. And again, Ezra Levant points out the separatists are better patriots than the NDP. And again, shame on the NDP. Like again, like if they actually, and this is the other thing too, all the people say, oh, I hate the Liberals, but I'm going to vote for the NDP because no, like you're insane. Why? Because they have no spine. Again, the difference between the Liberals and the NDP is almost non-existent. I mean, the NDP basically piggybacks off the fact that there's um, the leftists that actually have a spine, or the leftists that don't want to be associated with Justin Trudeau, vote for the NDP, and the leftists who think that the liberals are still like a 90s liberal that are actually somewhat moderate, um, the people that actually think that, and actually think that the NDP are the more leftist party, even though they're basically socialists and socialists, right? Like that there's no real difference. And again, Justin Trudeau just announced that they're going to be reforming the welfare system in Canada. And, they didn't mention specifically what, but I would be very confident in saying that something tells me it's not going to be, yeah, we've had a good run with this whole welfare thing, but, we can't really afford it anymore, so we're going to have to claw it back. No, it's going to be, we're going to increase welfare. We're going, because, wealth gap, or, crony capitalism, or any of this garbage that they bring up. And again, so welfare is going to be expanded. The NDP won't oppose it, which, and that's the other thing too. Like, I'd like to see a major policy position the NDP actually differ on. Now, again, you can point to their stupid, policy position on their website, but no, like, I'm talking about, like, show me a time when, Jagmeet Singh and these NDP people have been like, yeah, we disagree with Justin Trudeau, we're going to vote against them. Because if the Bloc, the NDP, and the Conservatives all bandied together here, they could have a vote of non-confidence. But the only thing holding that up, I believe, is the NDP. So that's the problem when it comes to that. And the last thing I wanted to bring up is, again, more, California leftist, garbage. And it's from Breaking 911 here. Uber CEO says company will likely shut down service in California after San Fran judge ordered Uber to treat their drivers as employees instead of independent contractors. Now, again, this is something that a lot of people don't realize. Uber would not exist if they, I mean, not at the very least, not nearly to the extent that they do, if their employees couldn't be treated as independent contractors. Now, why is that? When, as independent contractors, they don't have to provide the benefits and, a car. I mean, this is the other thing too. If they need to be treated as employees, Uber is going to literally have to give them a car, because, taxi companies give their employees a car. They're going to have to pay their gas, they're going to have to pay their insurance, they're going to have to give them benefits. There is no way that Uber can afford to do that. There's no way. So again, this is the problem. This is the problem with these leftist policies, and this is why I really, really, really cannot stand the left, and why I refuse to, agree with them and give in to them in any way, because I would be at least I would be and here's the thing, I would be open to it if they were at least willing to, um, find some common ground. And this is the problem, that they refuse to give an inch. They refuse to give an inch, because this is what happens. These leftists have this utopian fantasy that if they could just have their way, that everything would be fine. But the reality is that it's BS. Because what happens is, and this is a problem too, is that these people are in such echo chambers that they never expose themselves to beliefs that differ from theirs. They never seek out, opposing worldviews, and because of this, they have stuff like this, to where they think that, oh, you can never have too much regulation, you can never have too much socialism. But what happens is, eventually, it gets to the point where companies are like, hey, we literally can't afford to do this, and we leave, and they lose all those jobs. And what happens is, oh, well, everybody's out of work, so we need socialism now. We need a UBI, and the entire system collapses. And this is the other thing too. The fundamental difference between the left and the right is that, and this is where I really disagree with the whole libcon bird, all the, the hardcore libertarians of the world, and which I agree with them on more stuff than I agree with your average conservative. But the difference being is that they're not the same thing. All those people, the politicians, they're all this. No, they're not all the same. I would argue one of the main reasons why the right is moving to the left, which is why these kind of people hate them so much, is because of the left. The left has moved way to the left, so the right has moved to the left. And this is the thing that, the thing I brought up so long is that, um, if you're not explicitly anti-leftist, you will move to the left. It doesn't matter if you call yourself a conservative. So again, um, the main point here being is this kind of stuff is going to continue to happen. Because again, the left has this utopian fantasy that wages are just arbitrarily determined, and, if people are out of work, we can just give them free money. Like, these people are so just ignorant, it's not even funny. And the everyday average voter is just a useful idiot. Like, they're dumbed down to the point of not even being able to recover, I don't think. So, um, yeah, this is going to keep happening. I mean, California is a complete and utter nightmare. they're literally probably going to look like a third world country, down the road. Although to be fair, they do have a very high amount of rich people, which again completely contradicts the left's whole wealth gap argument that, oh, we have this terrible wealth gap and we're the only ones that can fix it, even though the state that's the furthest to the left has the biggest wealth gap, and I don't even think it's close, right? Like, you have some like LA and San Francisco literally have tens of thousands of homeless people, but yet they also have some of the richest neighborhoods in the world, right? So if this whole we're going to fix the wealth gap with our high taxes and regulations, well, why haven't you fixed it yet? Well, the reason why is that they don't actually care about the wealth gap. They only care about power, and the average supporter of them is so ignorant that they're willing to go along with it to the point where you end up like Venezuela. And that is why I can't stand these people, because they're so stupid and ignorant that they literally will vote themselves to becoming Venezuela under the guise of we're going to help the poor, we're going to end the wealth gap. Like, again, like just such insane amounts of ignorance, it's not even funny. So anyway, I'm going to leave the video there. If you liked it, make sure to like and subscribe. If you haven't already, check out those other links that are in the description. Make sure you follow me on those other platforms, and stay tuned for more.